to be on Zoom with us. And so I think we'll have to give her an enthusiastic welcome, as it's very late or very early on the West Coast. And we are delighted that this plenary session will be chaired by Dipna Callahan, who has come from a very long way just to see us. So we're very grateful. And so the floor is yours, Dipna.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted today to introduce Professor Patty Fumerton. I'm hoping I'm getting the pronunciation right this time. Okay, jolly good. Who is in the Department of English at the University of Santa Barbara, which, apart from having one of the most esteemed faculties in the US, is also probably the most beautiful campus in the US. So that's, and she's been there since 1987. So they're very fortunate to have her. I'm sure everybody in this room knows her work. Everybody, you know, will be aware of Renaissance culture and the everyday from 1999, and Renaissance literature and the practice of social ornament. Those were two books which were transformative of the field of early modern studies, and their impact is still seen in OOO, object-oriented ontologies, and a variety of things, including ecological work that has, in one way or another, emanated from those seminal texts. If you'll pardon that expression, we had a paper on this yesterday, it makes me self-conscious. She's also the founder and director of the English Broadside Ballad Archive, and her work in relation to that project has been prodigious. She wrote English broadside ballads in early modern England in 2020, Unsettled, The Culture of Mobility and the Working Poor in 2001. And again, ballad literature is often connected to the lower orders in England. And I think that Professor Fumerton is unique as a Renaissance scholar in attending to the people at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, as well as to those at the very top, and suggesting the relation between them. That is an extraordinary reach of intellectual endeavor, and it is, I think, her most wonderful achievement. Since then, in connection with the broadside ballads, so many things have come out. When I looked on the website, I thought we'd be here all day if I read them all. But suffice it to say that of these many works, there's also open access material available on the web, not just in English, but also in Czech. So incredibly impressive. And today we are very fortunate that she's going to speak on To Be Small or To Be Big, locked in miniatures. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Fumerton. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipna. That was a lovely introduction. And I wanted to say bonjour to all of those for whom it is morning. Well, it's morning for me too, but not in a different way. And to thank all the organizers of this wonderful conference, not just the wonderful introduction by Dipna, but Christine Zukic in particular has been extraordinary in facilitating my presentation. Without whose enthusiasm, I probably wouldn't be here. So I am so sorry I can't be there in person, but I will do my best to entertain you. So I'm going to share my screen without further ado, if I can. There's a problem of various things in the way. Okay. And you see my slideshow now? And I should be little. So I'm just getting rid of some clutter on my screen. Okay, to begin. As part of the introduction to Sir Laurence Olivier's 1940, oh, by the way, I'm going up. Dipna talked about how I've been looking low since 1987, really, but I'm going back up the social ladder in this talk. As part of the introduction to Sir Laurence Olivier's 1948 Academy Award-winning film production of Hamlet, a film which Olivier directed and in which he starred, He projects on the screen and speaks in voiceover a passage spoken by Prince Hamlet in the 1604 second quarter of the play. This is Act 1, Scene 4. As you know, the play was first performed around 1599 to 1601, so the passage is from a version older than the likely first performance. And it's also actually missing from the folio of Shakespeare's works, but it's nevertheless significant. I'm trying to get my PowerPoint to work. Okay, here we go. And is included in many stage productions, films, and printed editions of the play. Hamlet explains to Horatio that the trumpets they hear are played whenever the king drains a cup of wine, and considers the Danish proclivity to drinking a nationwide flaw. His explanation then goes off track, as it is wont to do, into a rumination about singular flaws in men generally. Small yet dominant defect, Hamlet muses, can ruin a man's life. After projecting on the screen and reading in voiceover this second quarto passage, Olivier concludes the film's introduction. This is all part of the introduction by showing what will be its ending still shot. The dead Prince Hamlet carried on a bier by soldiers at the top of the ramparts of Elsinore Castle, accompanied only by Horatio. For Olivier, this concluding image appears to stand as proof of the citation he has read precisely about the destruction of an individual by a singular flaw. As if in his own soliloquy, Olivier then in voiceover speaks a one-line interpretation of the play. This is the tragedy of a man who could not make up his mind. That is Hamlet's singular and deadly flaw, according to Sir Laurence Olivier. When my students watch this clip from Olivier's film and hear Olivier speak his unshakable interpretation, I forgot to put my timer on, of Hamlet's flaw, they typically laugh in response. They recognize what seems to be the absurd simplicity of Olivier's conclusion about the meaning of the play and of the problem facing its lead character. Indeed, for more than a century before and nearly 1 century after Olivier's affirmation about the significance of Hamlet, the fact that the main character suffered a tragic death from an inability to make up his mind, scholars have, on the contrary, found no such easy interpretation. Hamlet himself certainly spouts a barrage of monologues in the first half of the play that deliberate upon his troubled state of affairs and very being. Such a flurry of soliloquies, which frequently include thoughts of suicide, has led to the characterization of the play as one of a singular defect of character, not one of a singular defect of character, but as the birth of interiority. The play, and some scholars typically unite in recognizing, dramatizes a transition toward modern consciousness. That is, towards a subjectivity understood as unique, continuous, and interior. Hence, Hamlet's many soliloquies, though not necessarily a subjectivity certain in their thinking. I acknowledge in this talk that a special hidden, if puzzled inwardness is undoubtedly expressed in Hamlet's many monologues. However, my focus here is not so much on soliloquies as on a climactic scene in the play that as much, if not more, expresses Hamlet's acute and passionate ruminations over his maddening situation. I will refer to the now famously named closet scene in Act 3, Scene 4 of the folio, wherein Prince Hamlet confronts his mother, Queen Gertrude, now married to King Claudius, murderer and brother of King Hamlet, and thus uncle to Prince Hamlet. In confronting his mother, Hamlet releases from within a gigantic flood of affect through miniature paintings or limnings. Miniatures and the closets that contain them, I argue, are one key to opening up an understanding of Hamlet and the meaning of the play by his name. We thus must examine both more deeply, both closets and miniatures. Olivier, in his film, notably at all times foregrounds Hamlet's miniature, as do other productions. But the audience of any performance constrained by distance from the actors would not be able to discern what, if anything, is represented in the ornament Hamlet wears until he tells us. This fact adds to the confusingly conflictive and explosive power of the closet scene. And these are shots from Olivier. I thought it would be too dangerous to try to play a video. Indeed, enclosed within Gertrude's closet, Hamlet draws at length for 49 lines to the different tiny miniatures that hang from his and his mother's respective necks. He focuses on the different facial features limned within them, from which he expands to thoughts of corrupt sexuality, will, and reason, all which implicate personal and public powers of right rule. The problem for Hamlet and for us as audience, in a nutshell, is Hamlet's seemingly necessary expression of such big issues as will and reason, extending to rule, revenge, and suicide through miniatures. To invoke the opening phrase to Hamlet's famous "to be or not to be" speech, which I will examine in a little like a snapshot, Hamlet ultimately reveals not one choice, not either or, but both. We cannot see big without little, political without intimate, public without private. In fact, Hamlet, perhaps each of us, is trapped in always thinking of the big through the little. Big and little becomes something of a knot with a K, K-N-O-T, of being, as we also see in the small sonnet, specifically 24. And that's one of the little sonnets where the lover has within him a miniature that he shops to everyone to see, but it's glazed over by the eyes of the young man. Audience readers and critics thus get entangled along with Hamlet in trying to analyze the play's plot and meaning. Such is especially the case in the latter half of the play due to a noticeable paucity of soliloquies by Hamlet. Not that they've helped us a lot, but they've helped us a little. But he does fully express his deepest of conflicted being in his confrontation with his mother in Act 3, Scene 4, contained within her most private room, her closet, with a major caveat. The caveat, in what has become the growing knot of being in the play, the typically private space of the closet scene is violated on two fronts. Pointedly, the space becomes only semi-private in the play. I say semi-private because Claudius's counselor, Polonius, knowingly to Gertrude, has hidden himself in her closet behind one of its hanging tapestries and arras in order to overhear the exchange between Gertrude and Hamlet to Polonius's untimely end. So he's violating the inner space as a place where father and mother often would talk intimately with their son or daughter, and he's violating it, secondly, as a place where aristocrats of both genders kept their smallest and most intimate and prized possessions, typically revealed to only a select few. As Stephen Mullaney argues, these little objects could be enclosed in elaborate cabinets of curiosity that might display exotic treasures, such as a baby's skull. Cabinets within closets might be more simple, however. Plainer cabinets or the drawers of a modestly ornamented desk could still enclose very precious, minuscule objects. These might include jewels, private letters, or miniature paintings, also known as limnings. Miniature paintings were typically underscored very tiny. Represented is the unknown lady. It's one of the most gorgeous of the many limbed ladies who are today unknown. It's at the V&A, and you can see it there, and have the same titling, Unknown Lady. Though the figure portrayed is anonymous, art historians have determined that this miniature has been limned by the most famous limner of Queen Elizabeth's time, Nicholas Hilliard. So minute, the miniature is only 3.4 by 1.3 centimeters. Whoops, going ahead. So Closets containing such precious artifacts in the 16th into the 17th century were an increasing architectural phenomenon. I'd go so far as to say they were a fad in aristocratic houses, which modeled their spaces on royal palaces. Over this historical span, we find rooms were increasingly subdivided in a move to allow for not only large and public, but also ever smaller, more private interior spaces. The ultimate in such withdrawal, which I had jumped to, was the creation of banqueting rooms for consuming spices and sweets with intimates at the far end of gardens or even on rooftops, which I've discussed at length in my book, Cultural Aesthetics, and personally visited. And the absolute thrill of curling up a spiral staircase, getting on the roof and walking across the roof of Hardwick Hall, Elizabeth's birthplace, to one of the banqueting rooms is indescribable. Takes one's breath away. Still, the most interior architectural space within the series of larger into smaller rooms would be the bedroom, and even more interior to that space, if the architecture allowed, the very small room called the closet. But this must also be stressed. One could only retreat to the most interior space by passing through public and increasingly less public spaces. For example, with the subdivision of spaces in Whitehall Palace, a privileged visitor such as Sir James Melville, ambassador from Mary Queen of Scots, subversive cousin to Queen Elizabeth, calling on Elizabeth in 1564, could not meet her or would not meet her in the public hall. Yes, he would first likely enter the hall. Melville would then have passed through that very large space into the smaller, more private presence chamber, then into Elizabeth's intimately construed bedchamber. Whitehall, which was apparently architecturally limited, was not further divided sufficiently beyond the bedchamber to include a furnished closet further within. Akin to a small study that we find in homes today, the closet at the end of the sequence of segmented rooms in Elizabethan and Jacobean times would typically have contained a writing table, chair, and cabinet box, however elaborate, and perhaps also a chaise lounge. Fascinatingly, though, Elizabeth sort of subdivided her bedroom so that it was simultaneously a bedchamber and a closet. This might be one reason why almost every production of Hamlet includes a bed in the famous closet scene wherein Hamlet confronts Gertrude, though typically a bed would not be in a closet. Elizabeth's bedroom, according to Melville, was actually furnished in one place. And that's what I mean by construed. She formulated her space of the bedchamber so that there would be a more public area and then the closet. He was led there by this private space by Elizabeth, and he records that it contained a little cabinet wherein were diverse little pictures wrapped within paper and their names written with her own hand upon the papers. And it's not coincidental, I think, since Elizabeth was trying to arrange a marriage with between Mary Queen of Scots and one of her favorites, Leicester, the Earl of Leicester. It's not surprising that she showed, first of all, Melville from the cabinet she picked up in her bedchamber, one that was written and wrapped in paper and written with her own hand, my lord's picture. He continues, I held the candle and pressed to see that picture so named. She, Elizabeth, appeared loath to let me see it. Yet my opportunity prevailed for sight thereof, and found it to be the Earl of Leicester's picture. This enactment of pressing in close together to see a miniature and the owner hesitating to show the limning, holding it somewhat enclosed in their hands in a bodily visual journey as they open it up, journey inward, is repeated in story after story of showing miniatures, which I can't go into at length. You'll have to trust me. Melville pleads with Elizabeth not only to see the miniature, but to have it. I desired that I might have it to carry home to my queen, but Elizabeth refuses, alleging that she had but that one picture of his Leicester. Melville protests to the queen that she had the original person of Leicester, who was actually standing at the other end of the bedchamber talking with her advisors. It's thus politically and personally telling that Elizabeth greatly valued her miniature of the Earl. Miniatures, in fact, were usually limnings of loved ones, favorites, spouses, and children. So it's even more inwardly telling that Elizabeth enacts such treasured value on the little miniature painting she owns of the Earl of Leicester. Not to be left out of the political and personal equation of this incident and others of its kind was the literally high value of such tiny watercolor paintings. I refer to the rare materials used to manufacture miniature painting colors, such as the luminescent blue of lapis lazuli, and the extensive time it took for the painter to grind the components of his colors, which he did personally, as well as, importantly, the many close-up sittings of those limned by the miniatures. Though capturing a sense of the essence of a sitter, however, Elizabeth's miniatures are idealizations. Consider again the unknown lady. Her face is brilliantly white and unmarred, as well shaped into a heart. Reality and idealization merge. Care was taken by Hilliard, especially to imitate the three-dimensional intricacy of roughs, adding that sense of presence, but also idealization. He dribbles white paint onto the painting's ground and creates the illusion of jewels like the pearls in the lady's hair by raising the area and adding a shimmering gleam. Any gold color, furthermore, was actually burnished gold. Hilliard's added touch when painting a lady was to add a tiny flower not seen in any of his other miniatures. This is Hilliard's way of creating something like a stamp of personalization and intimacy. In the case of the unknown lady, we see a small, unidentifiable bud of a flower below her chin, perhaps a rose, perhaps a gillyflower. This ornamental display of an inner hiddenness, what we can't make out what it is, and it's unique to this individual, was typically then even more fully created by aristocratic purchasers of the or securers of a drawing and painting of miniatures through their casements. That is, after contracting a limning, the wealthy typically had the completed miniature enclosed in a bejeweled and engraved gold locket. The experience of opening such a locket is much like the intimate revelation through a publicly viewable performative unveiling that Elizabeth and others in the early modern period enacted in holding limnings without cases within their hands and then opening the hand in a personal and bodily controlled slow reveal. Intimacy is both hidden and publicly, yes, often politically performed. This can especially be seen in a few surviving lockets encasing miniature paintings. A few survived because, as everybody knows, jewels, when they went out of fashion or were no longer topical, were melted down and remade into another locket or jewel. And I'm thinking here of two jewels. One is the Heneage jewel, but also familiarly known as the Armada jewel. It celebrates England's victory over the unexpected naval attack by Spain in 1588. This small jewel is only 7 centimeters by 5.2 centimeters. The whole jewel, including the pearl, which we'll see, consists fundamentally of enamel gold on blue enamel ground under rock crystal. It's also studded with diamonds and rubies. The back of its outside on the left illustrates one of England's outnumbered ships sailing through a storm to confront the onslaught of the Spanish Navy, which, was blown off course and thus the attack defeated, though it's seen as by the grace of God. The front of the locket on the right sports a gold carving of Elizabeth over lapis lazuli. Here we see the inviolate, immovable, immortal, and all-encompassing Queen, or Gloriana, as termed by Roy Strong. It is this publicly displayed figure who causes the destruction of an enemy's fleet through the literal grace of God, it was thought. But within this public-facing locket, the privileged, that is, those allowed to open the locket and to peer inside, would see that it contained, for one thing, an engraved and painted rose on the obverse of the ship going to war. Whoops, I went backwards. This rose is both political, a Tudor rose, and intimate, a love token. It is encircled by the inscription in English, "Alas for me," it's in Latin, but I'm Englishing it. "Alas for me, that virtue so full of beauty does not have," surprise, surprise, "eternal, inviolable days." It therein, and I emphasize in, recognizes Elizabeth's mortality, just as all flowers fade and die. In fact, a humanized, if still idealized, limning of Elizabeth on the inside of the front of her publicly bedrock facade faces the politically intimate rose within as the most beautiful, again, shimmeringly white, with no wrinkles showing at the age of 50, if we all could, but still mortal and personalized lover. Opening the revelatory propaganda of the locket thus uncovers an inward turn. The locket is engaged in a play from public into private, and the showy and constructed ornament of the very private miniature itself continues the game, underscoring the play of turning inward only to find more public show within. The ornamentation of the early modern miniature itself was limned on the back of playing cards. And of course, in the case of Queen Elizabeth, the card was always the Queen of Hearts. We experienced something similar to this penetration inward, though through public spaces, in a surviving locket from the period dubbed the Gresley Jewel. In the Gresley Jewel, we physically and visually move on viewing the locket and then opening it from public to private ornamentation. We see at first a public-facing raised image on the outside front of a Black woman carved in ebony, shown on the left, and on the exterior of the locket on the right, we view an intricate abstract pattern carved into the gold of the locket with jewel-like color added within the engraved lines. Both front and back sport real rubies, diamonds, and especially pearls. But it's on its opening, we find inside the locket no such abstraction of value in terms of publicly displayed exoticism and wealth. Instead, we view two delicate and intimate images of a married couple. Sir Thomas Gresley on one side and his wife Catherine Walsingham on the other. Yet, and such yets always accompany Hilliard's miniatures, each figure is limned with its own showy, if inward turning ornament, like the gold burnished fiery crown above Catherine's head. In these two now famous lockets surviving from the period, we literally view represented public-facing exteriors and private-facing interiors that characterize many aristocratic miniatures of the time, even if the jewels themselves have not survived to the present day. And what I'm proposing, perhaps controversially, is that such bejeweled casings containing inwardness and something of a public show of limning that one must still penetrate on viewing was what was in fact most likely what was seen by the early modern or shown by the early modern actors of Prince Hamlet and Queen Gertrude. Notably, I admit my claim is based on common aristocratic practice at the time of Hamlet's performance, turn of the century. In fact, in all known, mostly modern productions of Hamlet, such enclosed public-private lockets are missing. In Olivier's film, as exemplary, Hamlet, the character, always wears the miniature of his father exposed for all to see to the extent it can be seen. Perhaps Olivier's Oscar-winning film production influenced later productions of the play. Olivier may have also wanted something like the ghost of King Hamlet always to be present in Hamlet's bejeweled but not enclosed miniature, representative of what inhabits and haunts Hamlet and what the audience should keep foremost in its mind. Although, of course, it doesn't know what's there until it's shown in the closet scene. Exposed intimacies drive home throughout Olivier's and other performances that the private self is what's at stake, not just or in addition to political positioning, public status, and for that matter, revenge. Finally, there's a simple awkwardness that might occur in fumbling by an actor and the time it would take to open two jewels. But could not this delay also be most performatively empowering, even if and because the opening would involve a heightened anticipatory pause for the audience? Considering the power that will ensue from wearing lockets being opened and their interiority exposed in the closet scene, as well as the fact of the aristocratic practice of enacting such exposure through ornamented enclosure on a regular basis, I argue that such wearing and opening of bejeweled miniature cases in Hamlet would add dramatic power to the exposed personal and political affect in the closet scene. Suddenly, in the scripting, Hamlet would be exposing something of his and his mother's interior selves in their lockets and revealing the limnings within. Such would seem to be a terrifying threat of self-revelation for Gertrude. Recall that after Hamlet's long comparison of the two different pictures he dwells upon, Gertrude cries out, "O Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turnest my eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as well not leave their tint," recalling or evoking, at least for me, miniature colors, limning colors. In the closet scene, then, I conjecturally propose, Hamlet opens his and his mother's lockets, and this very act adds to his emotionally and violently confronting his mother about her intimacies with Claudius, which Hamlet interprets correctly as sinful adultery and ill rule of self and kingdom. As has been frequently argued, Hamlet may be exposing and letting loose his own raw sexual passion for his mother, never before released in its full force in the play. Such sexual near mania, still puzzling to himself, even as it exposed from within, would seem to allow Hamlet to stab at the herd cry of Polonius hiding behind the arras. Erupting with emotion and action, Hamlet acts violently, but irrationally, only hoping, it seems, that the victim he stabs is King Claudius. The series of lines that lead up to this, Hamlet's first violent act in the play, and that not coincidentally precede, should we say provoke, his long comparison of his and his mother's limnings is most telling. "Come, come, and sit you down, you shall not budge. You go not till I set upon a glass where you may see the inmost part of you. What wilt thou do? Thou wilt not murder me. Help, ho! What ho? Help! How now? A rat dead for a ducat dead. Oh, I am slain. Oh me, what hast thou done? Nay, I know not. Is it the king?" What's so telling about this series of exchanges, I underscore, is that they immediately precede Hamlet's forcing his mother to sit down and look at and compare the two miniatures of King Hamlet and of Claudius, as if the queen anticipates that any kind of inward turning, as if looking in a mirror glass or at a miniature revealing her inward self, were equivalent to murdering her. "Oh, what wilt thou do? Wilt thou murder me?" She cannot bear fully to look inward to recognize her own and Claudius's sins. This may also be the reason she cannot see the ghosts of her former husband, the dead King Hamlet, when he appears towards the end of this scene, as Hamlet's passion towards her or for his mother reaches a crescendo. The ghost's appearance arises in the very midst of Hamlet's ranting at his mother about her inward sins, which the ghost had forbade Hamlet from doing. Hamlet is so intensely emotional in the closet scene that his confrontation with his mother for her own personal transgressions transgresses the ghost's prohibition. As if an interior imaginative haunting of Hamlet emerges. This scene then is the most charged exposure of Hamlet's deepest dilemma. The big ghosts, revenge, murder, lust, rule, demand of the following, all the ghost commands, not simply taking revenge upon Claudius, and Hamlet's inner difficulty, even rejection of such an enormous, even heinous deed of murder as taught by his humanist schooling at Wittenberg, as well as Hamlet's most intense desire to represent his mother. The problem Hamlet faces not together the big and the little, revenge and desire, public, political on the one hand, private, inward on the other. Notably, another closet scene occurs in the play before this most famous one, in which Hamlet confronts his mother for her sexual ill rule. It's typically not talked a lot about by critics, but it's really important, I think. And it's an accounting in Act 2 at the beginning by Ophelia to her father, Apollonius, of Hamlet visiting her in Déshabillé while she is sewing in her closet, which is seen in the period as an act of virtue. As I was sewing in my closet, Ophelia reports, Lord Hamlet, with his doublet all embrace, no hat upon his head, his stockings fouled, ungartered and down-gyved to his ankle, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each together, and with a look so piteous in purport, as if he had been loosed out of hell to speak of horrors, he comes before me. The description of Hamlet here much resembles a miniature painted by Nicholas Hilliard only 5 years before the earliest conjectured performance of Hamlet. Painted by Nicholas Hilliard, or perhaps by his disciple who extended into the Jacobean period, who was known for more dramatic sittings. And I'm thinking of Man Against the Background of Flames, which is rather prosaically titled. It was limned for some courtier, again around 1595, just before the estimated performance of the first play, which he would have sported at court. Since miniatures are meant to be close-ups of loved ones, this miniature shows a figure only from the waist up. But as in Ophelia's description of Hamlet visiting her closet, he is disheveled. His white shirt hangs unbuttoned and he wears no hat or jacket. And fascinatingly, and supporting my conjecture that Hamlet's miniature of his deceased father would most likely and powerfully be encased, the Man Against the Background of Flames holds what is clearly a jewel containing a miniature. We face the possibility of a mise en abîme, miniatures within miniatures. Critics, including myself, have interpreted the flames as the passion of love, which is what Polonius says. He says the very ecstasy of love, but that should be no warning to me because Polonius is adult. In the context of Hamlet, the play, one might consider instead, or as well, that the background of flames represents not only Hamlet's passionate and layered desire, but also a state of purgatory or even hell. And of course, the two are confused. In many ways, Hamlet is caught throughout the play in a liminal state of purgatory, much like that described by the ghost of Hamlet's father, who says, I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain time to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast and fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. Marrying the ghost Hamlet, as described by Ophelia, is as if he had been loosed out of hell, to speak of horrors. I posit not only the ghost is stuck in purgatory then, but so is Hamlet. The specific place, of course, whether it's purgatory or hell, would depend on whether one was Protestant or Catholic, since Protestants didn't believe in hell, or didn't believe in purgatory. Only momentarily visiting Ophelia's closet, if the story is true, Hamlet also enacts a reluctant showing of a limbed miniature locked, in this case, within another miniature. Ophelia sees the connection with the underworld immediately upon visited by Hamlet, as if he had been loosed out of hell, to speak of horrors. Being locked in a hellish purgatory within a miniature would seem similar states of being. Hamlet's purgatory, I thus propose, involves a kind of confinement within miniatures. Just as the Man Against the Background of Flames holds an encased miniature painting, and the play's agonies of pent-up passion climax in Gertrude's closet, with Hamlet obsessively comparing the miniatures he and his mother wear, so too Hamlet is all along caught in little ornamental details like those of miniatures. Oh my gosh, Dipno's introduction got in the way a bit. Not that it wasn't good. Consider the to be or not to be speech. And this is his most famous soliloquy. I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's a big one, right? Suicide or not suicide is one that, though, he should be able to easily argue, since he was schooled at Wittenberg and you're taught to argue on either side of the question there. But every time Hamlet thinks of to be, he thinks of not to be. So, for instance, when he thinks of the snake shuffling off its mortal coil, giving pause, we ironically realize that the snake shuffles off its coil not to die, but in order to grow. It's a kind of living. So Hamlet's metaphor knots life and death together, and that happens throughout this soliloquy. And I just want to end with I'm going to jump ahead here to past the sea change, past his arriving naked on the shore, even though that word's said 3 times, once by Horatio and twice by Claudius. There's a sense of rebirth. And I think always of George Wither emblem, and emblems were one of the origins of miniature paintings, the emblem on the books when they started appearing. The emblem's image I have in mind is the one of a babe resting on a skull encased by an Ouroboros of a snake eating its own tail, symbolic of eternity. The tongue twister or knot of being that titles the image is as soon as we to be begun, we did begin to be undone. And the doubling of the letters O, E, and N recreates the doubling of the fact revealed by the emblem that life is a death in which we all are caught. And the little babe seems contentedly lying upon that fact, recognizing that it's caught within such big issues like the Ouroboros of the snake. Hamlet himself recognizes such recognition in an inkling of insight in his one reservation to Horatio about going into battle at the tournament, but also saying, never mind, no matter not. There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. And such a beautifully small but ornate metaphor ends with Hamlet's recognition that the readiness is all that be. This is where Hamlet accepts the big in the little, such as the small of a sparrow, in the very uncontrollable knot of everyone's being. So I conclude, Closets are intimate spaces, though they're enclosed within public rooms. You have to penetrate through the public to get to the private. Closeted miniatures are carried to court in the form of case jewels, wherein you have to penetrate through the jewels to get to the inwardness. Ornamentation creates a layer of outer rooms akin to the ornamental metaphors by which Hamlet expresses his big ideas. So that reading, viewing, penetrating spaces, closets, metaphors creates an illusion of a journey inward to truth of self or solution to big dilemmas, but never ultimate clarity. The big and little are tied together, locked together in the little, like an Ouroboros sonata being. And I think of the final inward thrust of Sonnet 24, "Know not the heart." And as Hamlet would say, know it not, because the readiness is all let be. And let me stop sharing, if I can. So hold on. And let me just say, merci beaucoup for your attention. And I am sorry we went a little late. Forces were against us in some ways. And I am so grateful and wish I could hear more of your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fini, c'est fini.
Thank you for that wonderful and thought-provoking paper. I'm sure there are questions. Maybe I'm missing. Oh. Perhaps yeah, maybe you should come over here, sit when you. Yeah,
thank you.
Can you see me in big?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much for your paper. I was wondering whether you thought that this would actually perhaps also resonate with the supposed conversation that Hilliard had with Sidney about how to recognize the tall man from the small one within a miniature and issues of scale, you know, which are discussed in
Issues with scale are tremendously, miniatures are on Shakespeare's mind, and the small is very much on Shakespeare's mind. After all, plays face the dilemma of putting individual words on the stage in big, in order to try to draw the attention of a large audience. So and I think of A Midsummer Night's Dream also, where there are all these teeny little fairies and Puck. And yes, Juliet mentions miniatures. I haven't even gone into The Winter's Tale, which has got ballads, which have all these small pictures, woodcuts on them, which are also connected to the miniature painting. So, and those are in, peddled by Autolycus. And I think figuring importantly in counteracting the statue scene, the big statue, and Autolycus being there, I think is very important. Though it's not, people assume he's not.
I was thinking.
So yes, I think you're right.
There was perhaps a specifically political dimension to this, you know, sort of conveying political grandeur as opposed to sort of smallness, because in a text, I mean, in the again supposed conversation between Hilliard and Sidney, because it's only, we only have Hilliard's report from this conversation. There's very much, I think, at least in the background of this conversation, the sort of diplomatic conversations that were happening around miniatures as well. And one of the issues that miniaturist limners had was how to convey stature and size in miniature paintings. And in Hamlet, this might perhaps again resonate with the what Hamlet is trying to show to his mother as well, that Claudius is also a meaner, a mediocre ruler compared to.
There are huge issues at stake, is what Hamlet's saying. And I remember a lecturer once came to Santa Barbara and said, to my surprise, like, duh, I hadn't clued in, that all of Hamlet's histories and tragedies are family affairs. Well, they are. And he also said if people would just wait around for someone to die, they would get the crown. So the big is always embedded in the little, just as the little is always embedded in the big, which is to only answer your statement with a conundrum. But I think the conundrum is a fact. And it was, Hilliard had to make a big impact. These they're so little. When you go to the V&A, you go into this room and they're in cases and the room's dark because they're fugitive to light. You push a button and they come to light and you see the teeny little itty bitty, brilliantly ornamented images. And they're brilliant even now. You can imagine what they were like in their own time because watercolors fade. So I think, yes, the political ramifications are huge and hugely important and need to be, in some ways, actually, the best way to communicate a large issue to someone is through little things. Like with my daughter, I would always compare something to something teeny that she knew, and then it had impact. Whereas if I told her about the large issues of life, it wouldn't mean anything to her. So yes, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for this talk, Patty. This was great. I had a question about you mentioned the exchange in Elizabeth's closet where Lester is actually there. There are Lester's theoretically there, and she's loath to give up the miniature. And it seems like that dynamic is also expressed in Merchant of Venice when Bassanio opens Portia's casket and finds her picture, which is a miniature.
Well, or a picture.
Picture, but
it's go ahead.
Well, it seems likely that it's a miniature, at least, or at least it's doing the same kind of work.
It's a small painting.
And he lingers over the image to the point where he actually almost talks himself into its beauty overshadowing her own beauty, and has to remind himself that she's right there, and he should actually stop looking at the picture and start looking at her. And I'm wondering.
He says, "Don't pick gold," and then he starts talking about her golden coiling hair, and you think, man, you're going off track. You're getting caught up in the details and the beauty of this picture. What do you really care about here? It's very hard.
Well, and he imputes that the artist has outdone nature. That's his statement, that it's so much more. After, of course, he has already said, so make the outward shows.
Well, which is actually true of most limnings. Oliver was a little more realistic in the sense that he always painted more dramatic poses. But Hilliard, certainly, who reigned the limning world until 1600, Oliver was his student, and went his own way eventually, as all students do. Hilliard gets caught up in the ornament too. Like he's trying to convey an essence of being, and yet he knows if it's not breathtakingly gorgeous and almost exotically valuable in its sight, it won't be worthwhile. And I use the word worthwhile with.
And that was sort of, yeah, that was sort of my question, is that it seems like Hilliard, and this is the way that he's written about, is that he almost created such an amount of ornament that it became opaque, that there was a sort of a surface level to Hilliard's style that actually resisted depth in a way that Oliver eventually sort of would build on and go, and drama is the right way to put it. But Hilliard's miniatures are quite flat. And there's this strange way that if that flatness, which is supposed to allow us to see interiority, but at the same time we have in these two examples of with Elizabeth and Leicester, and then also, you know, Bassanio and Portia, there's something going on between the actual person and their opacity and the access that you get through a miniature. And I guess
yeah, it's like Shakespeare has an insight into both Hilliard and Oliver at the same time, because I wouldn't call Hilliard's images are not flat in that they're very three-dimensional. They're built up, but they're flat. And the word opaque is really interesting because in Sonnet 24, the speaker says, the picture in my heart, in my body of you is glazed over. It's shopped. It's in a shop, but it's glazed over with your eyes. And who's really glazing what over? I mean, Hilliard always adds that little flower of hiddenness, that bud to the women. And he has melancholic men, and he has this way of gesturing towards something hidden, but not in the way Oliver does. Oliver does it dramatically, performatively. And actually in Oliver, it's much more like an outward show. Whereas with Hilliard, it's an inward opaqueness. I think that's a really good way of putting it, even in its brilliance. And they are breathtakingly brilliant. Even now, you can see about 30 of them at the V&A if you're willing to troop all the way to that dark room.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up on that and on Jade's question. I'm thinking about the miniature of Sir Christopher Hatton, because I think it's he who asks about scale. And he's a full-sized figure, and he's not ornamented. He's not he's not particularly, you know, he's not a pretty figure. He's a very masculine kind of man. The sort of person I imagine would be like, you know, you choose to batten on this more, the kind of figure that Claudius might be thought to be. So, and he's perplexed about proportion and how his scale can be, you know, accommodated by the miniature. And it seems to me that that's the same problem that's going on in sonnets, where Shakespeare is dealing with these massive antiquities, but they're, you know, they have to be condensed and diminished, shrunken to 14 lines. But so what's the cultural energy that requires this diminution? And I'm kind of wondering, I think your work is in many ways kind of addressed and answered that, but it just the force of it comes afresh in relation to Hamlet, because I always think they're looking on, it could be pictures, it could, you know, in modern productions they use, you know, big paintings, but I think you're right, I agree, I think it's miniatures. But I always think, oh, these two, if it's paintings, they could look exactly the same. We don't know there is any difference.
Well, exactly. I mean, in Olivier's film, you never do see the image.
Yeah.
Even when Hamlet is showing it to Gertrude, and there's a close-up of them both looking at it, we don't see it. We never see the image. And I think that's telling of all productions. You're not going to see the image unless someone brings in an oil painting. The movement towards full scale, not full scale, but the whole body being painted is an interesting one in Hilliard. It's something that happens later in his career. There's also the man leaning against, which I've talked about at length, an oak tree
Yeah.
with the crossed arms and his crisscross jacket. Everything represents cross love. And it's full, it's from head to toe. And you wonder whether he wasn't feeling the pressure.
You know, that one that strikes me as, you know, it's ornamented, it's Petrarchan, there are roses, but Christopher Hatton, he's just
Isn't.
good.
And
He
I
is
actually
just
have,
good.
I've often wondered whether Christopher Hatton isn't by Oliver, to tell you the truth. But
Wow, oh, that's interesting.
yeah, because I've never been drawn to it in the way I am with Hilliard pictures, and which is just a gut response. But it just seems unlike Hilliard's typical miniature, whether it's from top to toe or close up. And you're right, it's the darker colors in it lead me to think of Oliver, who liked to deal with shadow. And it's just a thought. But what makes it a little important to answer that part is that move towards which I argue in my first book, inward turning subjectivity, I think. I mean, it's a big claim, and I can't prove it, but I think that you see it everywhere. You see it in subdivision of rooms. You see it in the ornaments that people wear. There's this constant enclosing and enclosing and enclosing. And, you know, what else could be driving that? Politics, yes. You have to be secret. But on a personal level, like as God, I'm blanking on the fellow's name who was just here. Speaking. Jim. As Jim said, the question in Hamlet is, you know, well, actually, what's at stake? What in all of Shakespeare is at stake? And Shakespeare's always turning around little and big issues to try to figure out what will best sell. It's in the end, it's a market issue, right? It's not about and it is fascinating that Leicester is in Elizabeth's bedchamber. So and that's part of the problematic of trying to find a private space. You never find a private space. That's why you can only look within the heart. You can never get within the heart. And that's probably true today. You know,
we can deposit. We have to thank Harrington for that, I guess. And the one private space of people come up and take the seat. Yeah. Oh, we have to stop. Oh, I'm told we're out of time.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause.
And sorry, Jim, for forgetting your name. It's very, very late. It's 3 a.m.
Oh, well, go to bed and sweet dreams. You
I have to have dinner. But thank you all very, very much. Christine, merci beaucoup, beaucoup, beaucoup.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
My French is horrible. When I'm in France, they always tell me to speak English. But I was raised in Canada, so what do you expect?
Okay, well, thank you so much for staying up so late, Patricia. And we're going to send you a link to our YouTube channel. So tomorrow, when you're rested, you can, follow the rest of the conference, and you can even watch, yesterday's papers as well.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. I'd love to see them.
Okay.
Thank you again. I
Thank you
really
so
appreciate
much.
all that you did to
Thank
make
you,
this happen. And
Patricia.
thank you, Dipna, for
Bye-bye.
that wonderful
thank you.
introduction.
Pleasure to meet you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.